Hey everybody, hope and pray that you're doing well. Today as we come to our word from the word. And today that word is enable. Enable. Now we're following up from yesterday. Today we're going to be in Luke chapter 12, verses 1 through 12. I did challenge you yesterday to look ahead and to be searching out answers to this third question about the Holy Spirit. And the third question is, what is the Holy Spirit's main purpose? Now, we talked a little bit yesterday about the unpardonable sin, and this is included in the passage that we're going to talk about today. But we're going to focus on a couple other things, and we'll kind of mention that again. There again, in case you haven't seen it, I pray you go back and see it. We'll put the link up for you. And basically, the unpardonable sin is basically, in a nutshell, resisting all the way up until death, resisting the grace and mercy that has been shown, and that the Holy Spirit testifies about Christ and is basically calling you to salvation, and you refuse it to the bitter end. When you die without Christ, that is basically refusing and that blasphemy against the Holy Spirit. There again, look back at the video. You can see that in a little bit more detail. But today, Luke chapter 12, starting in verse 1, says, "In the meantime, when an innumerable multitude of people had gathered together so that they trampled one another, he began to say to his disciples, first of all, 'Beware of the leaven of the Pharisees, which is hypocrisy. For there is nothing covered that will not be revealed, nor hidden that will not be known. Therefore, whatever you have spoken in the dark will be heard in the light, and what you have spoken in the ear in the inner rooms will be proclaimed on the housetops.' And I say to you, my friends, do not be afraid of those who kill the body, and after that have no more that they can do. But I will show you whom you should fear. Fear him who, after he has killed, has power to cast into hell. Yes, I say to you, fear him. Are not 5 sparrows sold for 2 copper coins, and not one of them is forgotten before God? But the very hairs of your head are all numbered. Do not fear, therefore, for you are of more value than many sparrows." I love that statement. Verse 8, he says, "Also I say to you, whoever confesses me before men, him the Son of Man also will confess before the angels of God. But he who denies me before men will be denied before the angels of God. And anyone who speaks a word against the Son of Man, it will be forgiven him." And here's the unpardonable sin that we see again. "But to him who blasphemes against the Holy Spirit, it will not be forgiven. Now, when they bring you to the synagogues and magistrates and authorities, do not worry about how or what you should answer or what you should say. For the Holy Spirit will teach you in that very hour what you ought to say." Now, let me just be real clear. We're just going to basically just kind of summarize each one of these, because we could spend a lot of time in each one of these passages, or each one of these little sections of verses. But in verses 1 through 3, right, he's talking about the hypocrisy of the Pharisees. And we know that even today there's hypocrisy that abounds, right? I mean, there is basically hypocrisy is saying one thing and doing something else. Now, I know you've probably heard it. Well, that church is just full of hypocrites. Well, if you find one that doesn't have any hypocrites in it, whatever you do, don't join it, right? They say if you find the perfect church, don't join it because it won't be perfect anymore. But the point is that, and I'm not, this is no way making an excuse or condoning hypocrisy, but there's hypocrites everywhere, right? People who say one thing and do something else. You see this regardless of whether they're Christians or not. You see this all the time. Now, as Christians, that should not be a characteristic of us, right? That should not be something that as soon as people hear our name mentioned, they say, "Well, I know they're a hypocrite." So that goes back to how we're living according to the Holy Spirit and what he calls us to do. But see, here in the context of this, in our conversation today, he's saying beware of the hypocrisy. right? So one of the things that the Holy Spirit does, he gives us discernment, right? And you're going to see this as we go through, because I'm going to keep pointing to verse 12 where he says the Holy Spirit will give it to you, right? The Holy Spirit will teach you. The Holy Spirit will give you the words to say. Well, at the same time, as we've talked about through this whole discussion on the Holy Spirit will give you the discernment, the ability to know whether or not you can believe what is being told to you. And as always, I tell you, I challenge you, look, don't ever take my word for it. This is the whole reason I wanted you to go ahead and look ahead, and I want you to research it and study it for yourself, so that what I say, you can say, hey, you know what? I found the same thing, and I see what he's saying. And if I say something wrong, call me out. Ask me. Say, hey, is this what you meant? Or, because, hey, I'm human. I mess up plenty. And there's plenty of times where y'all have heard me on here. I can't get my words straight. You've heard me Sunday mornings or even Wednesday night. Sometimes, you get hung up and can't think of what you want to say or say it the right way. But not only that, he goes on a little further in verses 4-7, and he's talking about, man, who we need to fear. And right, we have fear of men. And this really goes into that verses 8-12 as well, as he's talking about denying Christ before men. But as he's talking about, he says, look, you need to have fear of God. We don't need to fear the people that we see, because what's the one thing that they can do? Okay, the worst thing that we would say is they could kill us. Or even if we were facing the government, the worst they could do is still sentence us to death. Okay, well, if you're a born again believer, then that means you're going to heaven. Right? But what he's saying is, he says the whole issue is, why are you fearing them who they have no control? After they kill you, that's it. They have no more control. But you need to fear the one that not only after, basically he says not after he killed you, but then he could still sentence you to death in hell. He's talking about God. God could cause the end of your days to happen. And then as you're standing before God, he says, no, I'm casting you into hell. See, that's who we need to fear, the one who's in control, and that's God. But then even in that, he says, but wait a minute, don't you know that all these things that God knows, even every single bird, every single sparrow. He says, don't you even know that the hairs on your head are numbered? And I know some of you, even as I read that, you were thinking, okay, well, Zach made it easy for him. Few less to count. No, maybe it's harder. It's a little shorter, to count them. But anyway, God knows. God knows how many or how little a hair you have on your head. The point is, why are you worried about what men are going to do? Why are we worried about what everybody else is going to do? What we need to do is be worried or focused on our fear, and our reverence is focused on God, because he's the one in control. But then we get to verses 8-12, and you talk about the one, and I know you watch this online, and you see it on social media all the time. Hey, the Bible says if you deny me before men, and if you don't pass this along, and you don't send this on and pass this, post this, like this, share this, whatever, then you're denying him before men. Okay, that's not what he's talking about here. But in our day-to-day life, do we stand up for God? Do we deny Christ before men? And so that's where he gets into denying the Holy Spirit and blaspheming the Holy Spirit. It's that rejection of God completely. And that goes back to a little bit about what we talked about yesterday. But I love here at the end, he says in verse 12, let me read that again. He says, for the Holy Spirit will teach you in that very hour what you ought to say. And see, to me, that's even the Holy Spirit giving you the words that you need at the moment. See, he's already given you the discernment you need for hypocrisy, and he's given you the peace that you need even when you are facing fear of men. It's not that we still don't have a human flesh sinful nature to steal, and a natural thing in our bodies, because we're frail, is to be afraid of men. But he's saying, look, you can have the peace of God. We've talked about that in our Wednesday night Bible studies. But the point is that, man, the Holy Spirit, even then, when you don't know what to say, when you're called before even the government or whoever it could be, don't worry about what you have to say or how you should respond. See, if you have that right relationship with God and the Holy Spirit is guiding you and you're filled with the Holy Spirit, then he will give you the words to say. And I thought about, man, just looking back over our time talking about the Holy Spirit, and He illuminates, he teaches and speaks and guides and intercedes and invites and testifies. And I mean, the list goes on and on. You can go back and look. I mean, we've been talking about it for over a month about all the things that the Holy Spirit does. And to me, it's the same as, God is always what we need at the moment that we need him. Now, we may not think that it's exactly what we need, but in hindsight, we look back and say, man, God was right on time, or God answered perfectly, even though I didn't know it at the moment. So to me, if we're going to answer this question, what is the Holy Spirit's main purpose? And I told you a little bit yesterday, main part of that is that he points back to Christ and the work of Christ. And that is the message, the gospel message is always pointing back. And that's what the Holy Spirit does. But if a second part of that is that as he's pointing to Christ, that one of his main purposes is to enable the church, to enable you and I as believers to do whatever God has called us to do. And we talked about last night in Bible study about Philippians chapter 4 and Philippians 4:13. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. And I love one commentator pointed out that the Living Bible puts it this way. It says, I can do everything God asked me to do with the help of Christ who gives me the strength and power. And I would even add in there that it's not only with the help of Christ, but specifically with the enablement. I told you, I can't always get my words together. But that we can do everything that God calls us to do through the power of the same power that rose Jesus from the grave, as we're enabled by the Holy Spirit to do whatever God has called us to do. So don't let us make up excuses why we can't do anything and why we don't have the words and why we can't share the gospel. And the list goes on, why we can't. The point is that the Holy Spirit of God resides in you. And he says that you can if you'll just trust in him. So I pray today that you'll be enabled to do whatever God has called you to do. The power's there. Will you just let the Holy Spirit work today? God bless you, and I pray you have a great, great day.